Chapter 2281. Cameron smacked Waylon's hand away and turned her face away. You look like you always have ulterior motives. Waylon did not know how to react to that statement. He grabbed her into his arms and said, "All I want is you, and that makes me a person with ulterior motives?" "Yes." Cameron bit the bullet and replied, but her ears were flushed. She quickly broke free from his arms and took her cell phone out. "I miss my father, so I'm going to call him for a short catch-up. Don't follow me." She then hurried away and did not dare to look back. Waylon leaned back in the chair, propped the back of his hand against his forehead, and chuckled. She's really good at tantalizing others. Jessie locked herself in her residence for 2 days. Her phone had been spammed by emails, text messages, and phone calls all day long, and all the text messages that she received were malicious insults and curses. She curled up on the couch, had not closed her eyes to get some rest for almost 2 days, and she looked extremely overwrought. Now even her neighbors would glare at her with total contempt whenever she went outside, and she could no longer stay there. This is all Ronald's fault. It's all his fault. I can't just sit here and not do anything about this. I have to find a way to direct all the public rage to Ronald. Upon thinking of something, a hint of ruthless chill flashed across her eyes. At this time, in the hospital, Freya's contractions had started since dawn. It was 8 a.m. now, and the contractions had become more violent and unbearably painful. Colton sat beside the bed and held her hand. Seeing her face turn as pale as death every time a contraction hit, he was extremely uneasy. He looked at the doctor and said anxiously, "It didn't hurt so much last night. Why is she suffering so much now? Please think of something." The nurse responded helplessly, "Giving birth to a child is always painful. Her cervix dilation is only 3 centimeters now, and we have to wait until it gets to 10 centimeters before she can start delivering." Colton got up. 10 centimeters. She's in so much pain now. And you expect her to endure the pain until it gets to 10 centimeters? Is there no other way to help her with the pain? Sir, please stay calm. We can give her an epidural to relieve the pain. He nodded. Then get it ready immediately. After saying that, he wiped away the sweat beads on Freya's forehead and whispered, "Freya, just endure it for a while more. Everything will be fine very soon." Freya looked at him. "You don't have to stay here with me." He grabbed her hand. "No, I have to keep an eye on you." She endured the sudden torment. "I don't want you to see me in this condition. Please, go out first." Colton held back his urge to laugh. "You should know best about what's happening now. Why would you still care about your image?" She got infuriated instantly. "I just care." Colton stroked her cheek. "But I don't care about it." Freya was astonished and had forgotten about the pain for a split second. As the nurse was preparing for the epidural injection procedure, Colton's facial expression instantly changed when he saw the needle. "Wait a minute. Are you sure that this is the epidural procedure?" The nurse explained, "Yes, we need to stick this needle into her spine and inject the anesthetic." "That's not my point. This is such a long needle." "Are you sure about it?" The nurse gave him a sideways glance as she had been irritated by him since early morning. "Sir, are you the professional here, or are we?" Colton choked on his own words. Freya did not know how to react. "Colton Goldman, shut your mouth. You're so embarrassing." Colton took a deep breath and nodded. "Okay, just move on with it." When the anesthesiologist was about to inject the needle, Colton could not help but warn the medical staff members present. "You'd better be careful, don't hurt her." As the needle went in, Colton started comforting Freya immediately. He seemed more nervous than her. "It won't hurt, it'll get better, and everything will be fine very soon." Freya was rendered speechless. "I haven't even cried out in pain, so who's the one that's hurting here?" After the injection, the pain became less severe, and Freya could finally take a breather. The nurse brought her some milk and chocolate. "You should eat something first to replenish your energy and strength." Chapter 2282. Colton took the milk from the nurse, tore the carton for Freya, poured it into the cup, and handed it to her. After Freya finished drinking the milk, he peeled the chocolate's packaging for her and delivered it to the corner of her mouth. She was rather scared at first, but after seeing that Colton was running left and right in the ward for her, she suddenly burst into a chuckle. Colton stared at her. "What are you laughing at? I'm the one who's hurting here. Why are you more anxious than I am? I'm witnessing just how agonizing this is for you. We'll stop conceiving after giving birth to this child." Freya was stunned, as if she did not expect him to say that. Men have never undergone labor, so it's only natural for them not to experience the pain of childbirth. Thus, to some men, no matter how painful it is, giving birth to another child should never be an issue. But how many men would really care about women's feelings, and the fear that they experience during their first labor? Colton interrupted her thoughts. "What are you thinking about?" Freya smiled. "Thank you." Colton brushed away the strands of hair sticking on her forehead. "Listen to the doctor. You have to reserve your strength, so let's not talk anymore." At about 10:30 a.m., Freya finally gave birth to a baby girl in the delivery room. However, because it was a premature delivery, the baby was placed into an incubator at birth. Colton had been by Freya's side throughout the whole process to accompany her and witness the process. He took off the disposable surgical cap and leaned against the wall in the corridor when Maisie arrived in a hurry. "Cole, has Freya given birth?" Nolan and Waylon then arrived right behind her. Colton nodded. "Yes, it's a little princess." Maisie was surprised when she saw the outfit that he was in. "Were you in there to accompany her throughout the whole process?" He nodded again. She smiled. "Good boy. Your bravery is something that all men should look up to. Alright, you should stay here and take care of Freya. I'll go see our little princess with your father." She then brought Nolan to the neonatal intensive care nursery. Waylon stepped forward. "Cole, congratulations." Colton bumped his fists with him and then gave off a smile. "I can't believe that I really have a daughter now, and I was there to witness the whole thing." Waylon chuckled. "A daughter is great. It'll be even better if she's as obedient as Dee Dee. And let's not forget that Dee Dee is now a cousin." "Then what about you?" Waylon laughed out loud. "I'm not in a hurry for the time being. You should urge Daisy first. She's the one who got married before either of us." Achoo. Daisy, who was rehearsing the script, sneezed. She was wearing a padded jacket and was standing in the snow shooting today's scene. The actor who played Zenos Yates was Howard Lindholm, a man who had solid acting skills and had won all the Best Actor awards available in the entertainment industry before the age of 40. Howard handed Daisy a cup of hot tea that his assistant had brought to him. "Come, drink some hot tea to warm yourself up." Daisy took it into her hands. "Thank you." Howard glanced at James, who was standing not far away from the scene. That kid does have some potential, but his acting skills are still a little immature. When Howard was acting with him, James received quite a few NG from the director. After all, James was facing an artist of such high caliber, so it was normal for him not to be able to perform from time to time. Daisy smiled and said, "He has improved a lot compared to back then, and I believe that he'll play this role well." Howard nodded. After filming half of the scenes, Daisy returned to her trailer. Nolace was sitting in the car reading a magazine. "You've been waiting for me in my trailer all day, every day. Aren't you bored?" He closed the magazine and placed her on his thighs. "Nothing will be boring as long as you're the one that I'm waiting for." Daisy wrapped her arms around his neck. "Did you watch my scene today?" He pinched her chin. "Of course. My wife looks glamorous and is proficient when she's in front of the camera. Even the brilliantly white scenery around here can't compete with your beauty." Chapter 2283. Daisy was startled and chuckled. "I'm asking you to pay attention to the play, not me." Nolace kissed her on the cheek. "I paid attention to both the shooting and you." A hint of slyness flashed across Daisy's eyes, and she inserted her freezing hands into his clothes. He hissed and grabbed her hands. Okay, you've degenerated, haven't you? She pretended to be aggrieved. My hands are cold. Knowles hugged her and pressed his lips against her cheek. Is it really cold out there? She nodded. Knowles buried his face into her neck. Then do you want to get warmed up? Daisy became alert, held his cheeks in her palms, and said seriously, we're at a filming site, so you better not do anything to me here. He smirked. Do I look like such a person? Daisy suddenly received a text message on her cell phone. She took it out, took a glance at its content, and looked surprised by it. Freya has given birth, and it's a baby girl. Knowles placed his palm on her flat stomach. Then when will we have our little princess? She blushed. This isn't something that I can have just because I want one. He responded with a hum. Then I'll have to keep up the hard work. They then felt a commotion coming from outside the trailer and got out of the trailer. The sky that looked clear a few minutes ago was gloomy at this moment, and the crew had to stop shooting, pack all the props, and evacuate. Daisy raised her head. Is it going to snow? Knowles frowned as dozens of possibilities ran through his mind. Shannon came to them. Daisy, Mr. Knowles, a huge blizzard is imminent, so we have to evacuate down the mountains immediately. Knowles nodded. Director Fallon. A crew member rushed toward them. Shannon turned around. What's wrong? The crew assistant explained, one of our cars has broken down. We can't get its engine ignited. Take me there to have a look. Shannon followed the assistant and shouted to the crew members around, everyone, pack up and hurry down the mountains now. Don't delay. Yes, Director Fallon. Daisy looked at the broken bus, not far away. It was the vehicle that the crew took when they ascended the mountains. All the actors left first as soon as they packed all their belongings back into their trailers. Only some of the crew members had to stay behind because of the breakdown of the bus. Every single vehicle in the crew's possession was arranged to fit a certain fixed number of people, or else, it would be overloaded. Thus, almost all vehicles were fully occupied with personnel and crew belongings. As for Shannon, he asked his assistant to take his place and get into his car. Instead of following them down the mountain, Shannon stayed back at the scene to help. Daisy turned her head. Knowles, why don't we let some of them get in our trailer? It's very spacious, isn't it? It should be able to fit 7 to 8 people. Knowles frowned. It can fit for 7 to 8, at most. 5 more people still won't have a way down the mountain. She pursed her lips tightly and continued. That would at least allow one big group of people to evacuate first. Knowles turned to look at her. Okay, you should leave with them. I'll stay behind and find another way down. No, I'll stay by your side wherever you are. Stop fooling around. I'm not fooling around here. After saying that, Daisy walked toward the crew members and suggested, Director Fallon, why don't you descend the mountain in our trailer first? We'll stay behind and find another way down. Shannon was astounded for a bit. How many people can your trailer take? She replied, there's room for 8 people, including the driver. Shannon looked at the people at the scene and said, okay, you and Mr. Knowles should take a few of the crew members down with you first. Meanwhile, we'll find a place to shelter ourselves. The blizzard is coming soon. After saying that, Shannon asked the crew, if anyone wants to leave now, the trailer can fit 8 people. The crew members exchanged gazes. 2 to 3 of them chose to stay with Shannon, and the rest chose to leave first. Chapter 2284. Knowles walked up to them. I'll stay behind so that the trailer will fit 1 more person. Shannon refuted immediately, that can't be it, Mr. Knowles. You should leave with them. It's okay. I can stay and help. Daisy added, I'll stay too. Shannon thought about it as the dark clouds on the horizon became darker and started to cover half of the sky. Seeing that there was not much time for him to think about it, he gnashed his teeth and nodded. Okay, we'll go with that plan. After arranging all the people onto the trailer, 2 crew members were left behind, and the rest of the crew left. Knowles got into the minibus to check on the vehicle's condition and then got out of the vehicle. My guess is that the engine has broken down. A blizzard is now imminent, and there's no other place for us to hide around here. It seems that we can only stay on this bus for the night. Shannon turned his head and asked the other 2 crew members, do we have any food? We brought some bread and water along today, so we'll be able to barely make it through the night. He nodded. That should be enough. Okay, everyone shall stay on this bus tonight. Meanwhile, the others arrived at the hotel at the foot of the mountain, and Daisy's trailer arrived soon after them. Director Fallon and several crew members are still at the scene. This blizzard is coming already. If this is the case, won't they get trapped in the storm? After all, Shannon was the director and the person in charge of the entire crew, so everyone could understand his choice of staying with the others who got left behind. Someone in the crowd said, isn't Daisy's trailer enormous? Are you telling me that only 2 people fit in it while Director Fallon and the others are still at the scene? Can't she fetch the others down here while she's coming down? Her trailer has been modified, and it's a private property. Even if she doesn't want to bring you along, it's still a reasonable argument, the actress who badmouthed Daisy continued. Being rich does give her all the rights in the world, huh? She could have brought the crew down the mountain, but she made them stay behind instead. What if something were to happen to them? This project will just end here. Zafir, who was sitting on the couch in the lobby, took a glance at the woman and remained silent. James suddenly came out of nowhere and glared at the actress. Just who do you think you're talking about? Something happened up there, yet you were the first to escape from the scene. Since you're portraying yourself to be the Mother Teresa of modern days, why didn't you stay back in the mountains? The actor's expression changed, but she did not hold back. James, if you're shameless enough to be teaching me a lesson here, then why aren't you up there now? Yes, I'm not up there now. That's why I kept quiet throughout this whole process. But look at you, just how shameless can you be? Howard came out and held James. Alright, stop arguing already. Am I wrong? James shook him off and glared at the actress. I just can't stand the attitude that someone else is giving off. She obviously doesn't have the courage to stay behind, but she actually has the guts to blame others after the incident. Director Fallon asked us to come back for our own safety, so the only thing that we should do is to be grateful for that, instead of just sitting here, acting like Mother Teresa or Mahatma Gandhi, and badmouthing other people when they fall short or make a mistake. The actress's expression turned gloomy and pale simultaneously, as if James' humiliating words had stabbed her through the heart. The others did not speak up. They could only act as peacemakers to suit the atmosphere between the two. At that moment, the crew got out of Daisy's trailer, and Shannon's assistant asked, "You guys have come back safely. What about Director Fallon? Where is he?" One of them replied, "The car can't fit so many people, so Director Fallon, Daisy, and Mr. Knowles chose to stay up in the mountains for the night." Zafir was stunned, and his hand holding the cup tightened. Chapter 2285. Zafir got up. When will the big blizzard pass? One of the crew members shook his head. We don't know that, but there are 5 of them, and there's a minibus at the scene, so they can still survive the night if they can gather in the bus. Zafir's masseter twitched, but he did not utter a single word. James laughed, glanced at the actress, and mocked her. Oh, just how fast can some people smack themselves in the face? I wonder who's the person who was able to muster that much confidence to complain and badmouth Daisy just now. The actress was ashamed and left the lobby in anger. James crossed his arms and snorted coldly. How dare she pretend to be the Virgin Mary when I'm around? Later that night, the snow got heavier and heavier, and the strong wind whistled and howled. The lights in the car were turned on, which were maintained by the car battery of the minibus. Everyone was wearing thick, padded jackets and tried to get as close to each other as possible for warmth. The 2 staff members had fallen asleep next to each other, and Shannon, who was sitting beside them, had a thermos mug in his hands and was going through the script. Daisy leaned against Nala's shoulder while Knowles held the back of her hand. Are you scared? She shook her head. I'm not scared of anything as long as I'm with you. Knowles chuckled and then rested his chin on the top of her head. There's really nothing that I can do about you. Shannon opened the thermos mug, took a sip of warm tea, and took off his glasses. I think the blizzard will go on non-stop until tomorrow morning. Knowles looked at him. As long as the heavy snow doesn't cause a network failure, they'll be able to find us based on our GPS. He sighed and screwed the lid on. Let's hope so. Daisy suddenly asked, Director Fallon, have you ever encountered such a situation throughout your whole career? Shannon laughed. Of course. I've encountered worse. It's just that we have ourselves a heavy blizzard this time around. He then wiped his glasses with a cloth and said, It was 17 years ago when I first became a director, and I was still working as an intern abroad. I followed a crew to Alpine to shoot a volcano documentary back then. Those foreigners really shoot with their lives hanging on the line. In order to better capture a more realistic scene, they would risk their lives to approach the volcano in any way possible. However, who knew that the volcano would abruptly erupt at that time? Rocks could be seen flying in the air while magma spurted out of the crater and oozed into the surrounding jungle, causing a mountain fire. The lava had already gushed to the foot of the volcano. Daisy was stunned. Then what happened after that? Shannon remained silent for a while, before continuing. At that time, there were 16 people in our filming crew. We started evacuating when we sensed the approaching catastrophe. However, because it was my first time experiencing such a terrible event, I twisted my foot when we were escaping. It was too chaotic, and danger was catching up to us really quickly, so it was almost impossible for the other people who were running for their lives to take care of me when I tripped and fell. But just when I thought I was really going to die, someone pulled me up, and that person was the chief director of the documentary, Mr. Beckham. Knowles rubbed his chin. I've heard of Mr. Beckham. He's the most famous Irene documentary director. He has made many documentaries and won numerous awards. Shannon laughed. That's right, that's him. Speaking of which, he is my savior. If it weren't for him, I would have died back then. I asked him at that time why he would turn back to save me. He claimed that he was the chief director of the project and had to be responsible for the lives and property of all the people on the crew. Everyone that went on the journey must all return in one piece, and none of them should be left behind. After hearing the story, Daisy suddenly understood why Shannon would choose to stay and order the crew to leave first. It was because he took it as his responsibility. He's the director of the project, and he has to keep everyone on the set safe. Shannon tightly wrapped himself in his padded jacket and leaned on the seat. Okay, it's getting late already. Let's get some rest first. Chapter 2286. The whole night was silent for some yet noisy for others. The rest of the people were already asleep, and only Knowles was still wide awake. He lowered his gaze, stared at Daisy, who was lying in his arms, and gently brushed the hair on her forehead with his fingers. She twitched for a split second in his arms and went back to sleep. He smiled and then tightened his embrace. Knowles seemed to have recalled the time when Daisy accompanied him to Octavia, disregarding her own safety. Whether it was in the past or now, she had always been like this, which made it very difficult for him not to care for her. That was also why he could not stop worrying about her. At Basberg, in the hospital, Freya woke up in the middle of the night and wanted to get out of bed, but Colton pushed her back down. Don't move. You have to rest. She felt helpless. But I want to go to the bathroom. Colton took a potty out from the bottom of the bed and handed it to her. She felt extremely embarrassed and pointed at the potty in his hand. Are you asking me to use this? When he noticed something, he raised his eyebrows and smirked. Is it too bashful for take off your pants? I can help you with that. You should first leave the room. Freya grabbed the potty from him. He did not even budge. Freya became even more anxious. Go out. I can't do it with you staring at me. Colton crossed his arms. I've seen you give birth to a baby, and you still care about this? You. I'll hold it in then. Okay, I'll go out first. Be careful. Colton was really afraid that she would get angry, so he exited the ward and closed the door, but he only stood at the door and did not go far. Freya couldn't help but place the potty back under the bed, quietly got out of bed, and walked toward the bathroom. When Colton heard some small noises coming from inside the ward, he pushed open the door, entered the room, saw her coming out of the bathroom, and frowned. You're really a rebellious one, aren't you? She sat back on the bed. Don't you know that all women can get out of bed and walk a little straight after giving birth? Colton turned his face away. Does it not hurt anymore? She blushed and lay down directly, feeling that she really had no privacy at all. Colton walked to the chair, sat down, and covered the quilt for her. But you'll go straight into postpartum confinement after you leave the hospital in a few days, right? She was slightly confused by Colton's question. Postpartum confinement? Is that even a thing in Yarramore? Colton looked at her. We're following the Zlokovian ways of doing things here. Freya turned her head away. I'm not married to you, so why should I stick to the Zlokovian customs? I only gave birth to a child. It's no big deal. Colton became exceptionally silent all of a sudden. After a moment, he got up. You should grab some rest first. He then left the ward immediately. Freya watched as he left, and her gaze shifted downward. Is he mad? The sky became gradually brighter, and the blizzard that had been raging all night in Karelia finally stopped in the morning. The yellow minibus was extremely conspicuous in the snow. Its roof was covered in a thick layer of snow, and the windows were covered with a thin layer of frost. It took a lot of effort to open the door, and the snow fell to the ground once they managed to do so. Nolace was the first person to step out of the bus. He squinted and looked at the scenery in the distance. The two crew members also got out of the car. The snow has finally stopped. Yeah, man. Huh? My phone still has a signal. We can call them to send help here. Shannon was the last to get out of the bus with Daisy and immediately took a glance at his watch. Paige, contact the others, and while you're at it, find a vehicle to move the broken car down the mountain for us. The crew member, whose name was Paige, nodded. Okay. Daisy wrapped her padded jacket tightly and walked toward Nolace. What are you looking at? Nolace turned back. Why did you get off the bus? Aren't you cold? She crossed her arms. You guys don't even feel cold, so why must I pretend to be a spoiled princess? He smiled, raised his hand, and rubbed the top of her head. My wife is indeed not a squeamish lady. Paige had contacted the crew back at the hotel and reported back to Shannon, Director Fallon, they're sending someone here now. We've been asked to wait in place. Chapter 2287. Shannon nodded. Help finally arrived at the scene at about 8:30 a.m., and all of them got in the minivan, left the mountains, and returned to the hotel at the foot of the mountain. The other crew members finally breathed a sigh of relief. James walked toward Daisy. You guys are finally back. I've been worried all night. Daisy placed her hands behind her back, looking like she had always been in control of the whole situation. What's there to worry about? It was just a blizzard, wasn't it? He grinned. I think with your husband there, you won't even be afraid of the apocalypse, right? They went back to their respective rooms, took a hot shower, changed into clean clothes, and went down to the restaurant for breakfast. Daisy drank a mug of warm almond milk and was revived from all the fatigue as her stomach warmed up. James sat across from her with his plate of breakfast and looked around. Why isn't your husband here for breakfast? Daisy picked up her fork and started eating her pasta. He and Director Fallon are eating together in the room. Daisy. Daisy froze for a split second, turned to look at Zafir, who was approaching them, and gave off a polite smile. Zafir. James stared at Zafir without speaking. However, Zafir ignored him directly as if he was not even there. What a relief to see that you're safe and sound. Just as she was about to say something, James took a sip of almond milk. If I'm not mistaken, whether she's able to return here safely and soundly really has nothing much to do with you. Daisy stepped on him. Zafir's gaze shifted away, and he smiled. Then I shall leave you to your meal. He then left directly. Daisy stared at his back. Ever since they arrived on the set, Zafir had not spoken to her very often. Perhaps it was because of no lace or what had happened at the dinner party. James looked at her. What's up? Can't bear to see him leave? She frowned. What are you talking about? James grinned. I thought you can't bear to see that friend of yours leave, but let me warn you before you get yourself into any trouble. Zafir is very popular in our crew, especially among those single female artists. Although you're already married, they're still keeping a close eye on you. Be careful not to get involved in any form of scandal. After all, other people's mouths can sometimes be very heinous. Daisy wondered. How do you know? James put his mug down. Do you know who I am? I can see through any kind of person with just one glance. Nothing happening in the crew and cast can escape my observation. When a person gets jealous, things will get out of control very quickly. After saying so, he solemnly reminded her, you have to keep an eye on your husband too. After all, your husband's appearance isn't inferior to that of Mr. Gosling's, so don't allow some ill-intentioned women to wreck your household. Daisy smiled. Is this the time where I have to praise you? You're so amazing. James rubbed the tip of his nose. There's no need for that. I know just how amazing I am. Several B and C list female artists sitting not far away looked at Daisy's interactions with James. The actress who had gotten humiliated by James yesterday looked disdainful. She already has a husband, yet she's still maintaining a close relationship with another man. Tiffany, stop gossiping about her already. You should know very well what kind of background Daisy has. It won't do you any good if she learns what you just said. Tiffany looked at the female artist who reminded her. Why would you be afraid that she'll kick us out of the cast? She's been telling everyone in the industry that she didn't get to where she is today because of her connections. If she really has the guts to remove us from the cast, she'll only slap herself in the face. The female artist ate with her head down and did not speak again. The other two artists could not help but gossip. Have you noticed that assistant director Gosling and James seem to always surround her? I bet their relationships aren't as normal as they seem. Chapter 2288. Tiffany's expression dimmed. Why would it have something to do with assistant director Gosling? I can tell that he's not someone who's stupid enough to take fancy to a married woman who likes to flirt around with other men. The two giggled and did not say anything else. After their meal, Daisy and James left the restaurant. The two stood in front of the elevator and waited. However, when the door opened and the people in the elevator came out, James pulled Daisy, who kept staring at her phone. Who knew that his actions would be captured by someone from afar until the two of them walked into the elevator together? In Zlokovia, at Basberg. Freya went to the nursery to visit her baby. She glanced at the tiny figure in the incubator through the window, and her heart was about to melt. Freya. She turned around and was slightly startled. Mrs. Goldman? Maisie smiled at her and walked to the window. Isn't the baby adorable? Freya nodded. Yeah, she's indeed really adorable. Maisie turned to look at her. Being able to see the baby that one gave birth to will be one of the happiest moments of anyone's life as a mother. Right now, I think you should have experienced it too. Freya's eyes shifted back to the baby, and she chuckled. I've indeed experienced it. Freya, thank you for giving birth to a daughter for Colton. Freya was stunned and stared at Maisie. Maisie looked at the baby through the window. I hope you can move forward with Colton and accompany him for the rest of his life. Freya pursed her lips and stared at the child in the incubator room. This baby isn't only the bond between us, but also the fruit of our love for each other, so how can I be cold-blooded enough to leave? Maisie asked with great interest, by the way, have you two named the baby? Freya shook her head. No, not yet. Then I figured it out for you. Maisie supported her chin, gave it a deep thought, and snapped her fingers. Let's call her Hope, which signifies hopefulness. On the other side of the city, the police came to arrest Ronald, claiming that he had attempted to murder his wife, and brought him back to the precinct to assist in the investigation. Ronald sat in the interrogation room and denied every accusation. I did cheat on my wife, but why would I murder my own wife? She was only injured by accident. The police officer lifted his gaze. Are you sure you didn't plan to kill Mrs. George? Ronald quickly explained, of course. I wasn't there to murder her. I only pushed her accidentally, and she fell. Didn't I send her to the hospital in the end? The police officer put his pen down and added, Mr. George, according to our investigation, you didn't think about saving Mrs. George at the time and even tried to get rid of her body, to hide all evidence against you. If it weren't for someone else who located Mrs. George before anything worse happened to her, I'm afraid she'd be dead already, am I right? Ronald's expression stiffened. What? How's that possible? Who told you that? The police officer crossed his hands and propped his elbows against the top of the table. We got it from the testimony of your mistress, Miss Blueman, who was also at the scene at the time. Ronald's expression gradually dimmed. A car was parked in front of the hospital. Colton looked at his watch, adjusted his suit, and got out of the car. Arriving at the VIP inpatient department of the gynecology department, he stopped outside the door of the ward. Just as he was about to open the door, he heard peals of laughter coming from the other side of the door and recognized that they belonged to his mother and Freya. Colton pushed open the door and went in. Maisie was sitting next to the bed, his baby daughter was wearing a swaddle and was lying in Maisie's arms, while Freya was grabbing her little hand extremely carefully and did not dare to exert too much force. Colton, you've come. Do you want to hug Hope? Hope? He frowned. Who's the person who named her? Maisie got up with the child. Yeah, it's the name that I've chosen for my little granddaughter, Hope. Colton covered his forehead with his palm, giving off a disgusted expression as always. Geez, you're really good when it comes to naming children, huh? Chapter 2289. You brat, are you telling me that you dislike it? Maisie turned the baby in her arms toward him. You'd better come up with the name that you want for your daughter in front of her right now. If she laughs, we'll name her using the name that you want. But if she cries, you'll just have to accept the fact that she'll be called Hope for the rest of her life. Colton was dubious. Can she even understand it? Maisie waved her hand. Whether Hope will understand it or not is the least of your worries. Go for it now. Colton stared at the little girl, who still looked a little wrinkled in the swaddle, and seemed a little embarrassed. I'm not really competent when it comes to naming my own daughter. He then looked at Freya. Freya froze for a split second. Don't stare at me. I can't think of a better name than Hope. Colton crossed his arms. My sister's name is Daisy, named after the flower Daisy. If I call my daughter Hope Goldman, there will be one too many names in the family that are so commonly used in Zlokovia. Maisie sneered. Who told you she'll be called Hope Goldman? I've already thought about her full name. It'll be Hope 1 Goldman. Colton refuted instantly, if that's what you've come up with, I prefer Hopany. Maisie was a little confused by Colton's suggestion. Freya rubbed her forehead. Hopany sounds even worse than Hope 1. I'd rather call her Hope 1. Hope 1 Goldman sounds rather innovative and is surely rarely used. Colton rubbed his chin and stared at his daughter for a long time. What about Charm? Maisie and Freya were both shocked. You're going to name your daughter Charm? It's short for Charmaine, Charmaine Goldman. Colton then took the tiny baby into his arms. It means joy and delight. Doesn't that sound great? Freya was stunned. Joy and delight, huh? Colton poked her tiny cheek gently with his fingers. Mom, look, isn't she smiling? Maisie pouted. What a time to give off such a brilliant smile. Okay, it seems that my hope for her to be called Hope has just gone down the drain for good. Freya suggested, the baby's middle name can still be Hope, right? Maisie paused, then nodded. That's true. Let's call her Charmaine Hope Goldman then. After Maisie left, the nurse carried the baby back to the nursery too. Freya leaned against the bed and looked at him. Why are you here? Shouldn't the company be very busy recently? Colton sat in the chair next to the bed. Can the company's affairs be more important than my own daughter? Freya did not respond to that question. Colton glanced at her. You will be discharged soon, right? Freya narrowed her eyes. So, what if I'll be discharged soon? He leaned back into the chair. It's nothing important. We'll talk about it when you get discharged. Her curiosity was piqued. Why can't you just tell me now? Colton smiled. I just won't tell you now. Freya lay back on the bed and turned her back to him. I'm going to sleep already. He laughed out loud. You loved to sleep when you were pregnant and had slept so much back then. How are you still so sleepy after giving birth? If you continue to sleep so much in the future, you'll put on weight and become fat. Freya sat up immediately. Colton Goldman, what you promised me back then is all just you bullshitting, right? He said he'd treat me better once I've given birth. What kind of horse crap was that? The first thing he did as soon as he came in was obviously argue with me. Colton smiled without saying a word. Leonardo brought Gina's son to her, and she burst into tears and hugged him as soon as she saw he was safe and sound. Amos, where have you been all these days? I've been so worried about you. Amos replied, Mommy, I've been staying with a man. The man said Daddy was the one who let me stay with him. He was very kind to me and bought me a lot of toys. Gina stroked his cheeks. It's all right now, as long as you've come back safely. I'll never allow anyone to lay a single finger on you, never again. After the long-awaited reunion, she asked Amos to go back into the house first and then looked at Leonardo. Mr. Pritchard, Ronald is nothing but a heartless man. I don't want to stay with him for another day longer. I wish to file a divorce against him as soon as possible. Even if I'm not doing this for myself, I have to do it for Amos. Leonardo grinned. Don't worry, we'll assist you with all the procedures. Chapter 2290. The next day, Gina provided all the evidence to the court. Everything she gave showed the court that her husband cheated on her, made her a victim of domestic violence, and even attempted to kidnap their biological son to force her into filing the divorce without asking for a single penny. She asked the court to get things moving as soon as possible. Darian also provided the court with more important information and evidence, which pointed to the fact that Ronald intended to kill his wife. Gina never thought of this and was shocked by it. He wanted to kill me? Darian nodded. After you fainted at Miss Blumann's place, Mr. George didn't show any intention of rescuing you. Instead, he planned to kill you and bury your body in order to get rid of all evidence. You would have died that day if someone else hadn't heard the commotion and come to your rescue. Gina's face paled. What kind of man have I been married to all these years? My husband actually wanted to kill me for a mistress. She originally did not plan to fight for her half of the marriage. Even if she had to leave the man without getting a single penny, she would still file for a divorce. But when she heard the news, she was bitterly disappointed. Gina took a deep breath and gnashed her teeth. I originally wanted to get out of this marriage without asking for anything in return. However, since he can treat me so ruthlessly, then I don't think that there's a need for me to sympathize with him. After filing for her divorce, the court listened to all her requests and arrived at a sentence. The custody of the son would go to the wife, the house that both parties bought together would also go to the wife, and the husband would need to pay the wife $20,000 in reparations. After leaving the court, Gina tweeted several descriptions of more than 1,000 words in total on Twitter, saying that she was glad that she could finally get a divorce. Soon, her tweets were retweeted by many netizens, and she managed to make it into the 6th most popular search list of the week. Hashtag I didn't expect that there'd be a follow-up to what happened back then. Mrs. Gina George is really unlucky to have gotten married to such a top-notch scumbag. Hashtag it's normal for husbands and wives to own common property after marriage. So, I won't say shit about a scumbag who has no bottom line when it comes to cheating on his wife, but how dare you ask your wife to leave without asking for a single penny? Just because he's the breadwinner of the household throughout the years, hashtag. Hashtag he's suspected of attempting to kill his wife. This shitsack really has no morality whatsoever. He should just die, hashtag. Inside a motel room, the light was extremely dim. There were empty cans of beer lying all over the floor, and the whole room was filled with the smell of alcohol. Ronald was leaning against the wall, with a scruffy beard and mustache, and his expression looked gloomy. A notification about the court's decision regarding Gina's request to file a divorce lit up the screen of the cell phone, showing a long list of notifications. Among them were more than a dozen missed calls and text messages from employees reminding him to cash in their checks. Ronald flung the phone against the wall, and the screen shattered. He covered his face with his palms and gnashed his teeth. "Jesse Blueman, you bitch. I love you so much, how dare you betray me?" In the shopping mall, Cameron took Dee to the children's clothing store. She personally selected more than 20 sets of winter clothes for Dee. Among them were a handful of tiny skirts and small coats that had furry ears on their hoods, which looked cute and pretty. "Dee, what do you think of this? Doesn't it look particularly cute?" She was there to pick some clothes for Dee, but she looked even more excited than Dee was. Dee jerked at the hem of her clothes. "Auntie Cameron, you've chosen too many clothes. I can't wear them all." Cameron squatted down to look at her. "Don't worry. I've chosen clothes that are one size bigger than you now, so that you can still wear them when you grow a little taller next year." Dee tilted her head. "Will they be very expensive?" Cameron grinned. "They're not expensive at all. I'm not paying for them with my money anyway." Dee did not know what Cameron meant by not expensive at all, but as long as they were not expensive, she would accept them. Cameron asked her to choose some more by herself, and she took a fancy to a complete set of dress, robe, and boots that imitated the attire of Little Red Riding Hood as the lace bow at the collar caught the attention of the young girl. She walked over and was about to touch the dress when another hand touched the same dress as her too. Dee was astonished and turned to look at the little girl beside her, who looked a few years older than her. The young girl was also stunned for a split second, but then quickly said, "I'm the one who saw this dress first."